Welcome everybody to our webinar this evening. We're going to be hearing about diet in PKD 2025, sorting fact from fiction. So now let me introduce this evening's speaker. This is Associate Professor Kelly Lambert. Kelly, we are so grateful to be hearing my gosh, let me start that again. We're so grateful to be hearing from you, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, and hello everybody on this cold evening. Lovely to be here, and hopefully I can answer lots of the questions that have come through. So I'm just going to share my slides and hopefully we can get on with the show. So Jess, can you see the slides okay?
They're up.
Yes, excellent. So I am going to leave my email on the screen there for a second in case people would like to email me down the track or after the event. I do welcome lots of questions because I know that it can be challenging to find a dietitian sometimes. So I may be able to answer some generic questions if people have them. So I currently work as an academic at the University of Wollongong. I no longer work in clinical practice, but I do love doing lots of presentations and connecting with people who have kidney disease. So what am I covering tonight? These are the topics. Broadly, I'm going to talk about what kind of diet, in inverted commas, should a person with PKD follow. We'll talk about, is there anything you need to avoid? We'll talk about some frequently asked questions that I see around the place or get asked. And then I'm just going to briefly cover some new information that you may not have heard about, but I think is exciting, and it's in relation to some of the research that I am doing. So I wanted to start with this question because it's a really common question, especially for people who are newly diagnosed. And I think it's a good one. So what is the role of diet in PKD? Well, in actual fact, from a scientific perspective, we're really still not quite sure. There's some evidence that there's some tantalizing hints that diet can play a role, but we've got so much science left to do to really confirm things that there's a lot that's still grey. So it's an under-researched area, that dietary studies. There's lots of hype around it, and I know people often see stuff on social media, or they see books around that, suggest there's a very strong connection between diet and PKD. And some of that's not quite true. It's actually extending the science far beyond what we actually know. But I know there's a lot of interest from patients with PKD because you want to do as much as you can to kind of halt the progression of the condition, and I totally appreciate that. So what I thought we would do is, especially if you're new to this, is just start with some explanation, because I know the science is really complicated. So let's start with a bit of an explanation of what's happening in the kidney. So first off, you may or may not know that PKD is related to two mutations in two genes, and both of those contribute to the development of PKD. What's important to maybe understand is one of those genes controls the size of the tubes in the kidney, and the other gene helps detect fluid going through the kidney, and they have two really important functions. So once you've got the trigger for whatever it is that we don't yet know that causes it, the process of cyst formation is triggered, and what we have is, in the box there, expansion of those cysts due to rapid cell growth, and we get fluid accumulation. And it's at this stage that we think that what you eat and drink has a particular role. So firstly, growing cysts causes us to wee lots and lots of that urine is really diluted. And that's a problem for a couple of reasons. One is that when you lose lots of urine, you can become dehydrated, but you're also losing diluted urine. So you're not losing as much electrolytes. In any case, what happens there is that it triggers a cascade of hormones. And one of those hormones is called vasopressin. And it's triggered to stop you from becoming dehydrated. And this is the part where diet comes in. Because if you don't drink enough water, your body triggers more vasopressin and the cysts grow more. We also know that if you eat too much salt, then that triggers the same response. And so salt is directly connected to cyst growth as well. And there's been plenty of studies in animals to demonstrate that. So it's quite a complicated process. So here's where the science is at from a up-to-date perspective. So I'll just explain the little symbols on this slide. So we know from randomized controlled trials, and they're considered the gold standard of evidence, and these trials are in humans, that there's at least 6 human studies that have confirmed that when you have a diet with too much salt, it drives the vasopressin secretion, it causes decline in your kidney function, and it increases the volume of those cysts. So we know that there's strong evidence about that. We know from some of the animal studies in mice that dehydration also triggers that response. We also know from animal studies that caffeine is associated with cyst growth, but there's not been any human studies to demonstrate that. We also know that obesity is associated with faster progression of the disease, and that's been shown in a couple of different studies. And just an interesting fact that perhaps you've never heard before, we know that in one of the studies that was conducted in humans, they found that if you could get your salt intake down to the recommended amount and keep it there, it actually can delay dialysis by up to 4 years. And I think that's amazing. That's definitely worth doing. So we also know of the recent cell studies. So this, when I say recent, I mean the last 5 to 7 years or so. We also know that at this stage, cysts also use glucose to grow. That's kind of not a normal response. And this is the crux of why keto and low-carb diets have been successful in rat studies, because keto and low-carb diets deprive the cysts of glucose and therefore their inability to grow. But we have to exercise a fair bit of caution because we have not yet demonstrated in humans that this is actually the case. So the problem with kind of in vitro studies, so that's the cell studies, and the problem with animal studies is that they take a single factor like glucose and try and test the mechanism of action. And the problem is in humans, we don't work so simply. And people have lots of conditions, they live in lots of different environments, they have complex interactions with diet, and we also don't eat the same thing every day, like mice, for example. So one of the common frustrations I hear is, why are there not more studies about diet in PKD? And it's actually a good question to ask, specifically for me. I would love it if there were more, but it's actually really complicated. And let me just tell you why. So what we really want are intervention studies where we give some kind of treatment to 2 groups, one that doesn't receive it and one that does, and we want to see, does it have an effect? But the problem with conducting those kinds of trials, particularly diet trials, is that you can't blind people to food. Unlike a tablet, you can get 2 tablets and make them look exactly the same and you won't see what they are until the end of the study. You can't really do that with food. And so people's responses, especially if you're asking them to kind of rate things subjectively, are totally influenced by the fact that you can see what you're being given or what you're being fed. We also know that you need a really long time to follow people for dietary studies because some of those effects take a long time. So they might need to go for 2 or 3 years, and people can't really commit to studies for such long periods of time, especially if they're an intervention. People don't want to eat the same thing every day. That's part of the problem. It's not like taking a tablet once a day. You have to eat multiple times a day, and nobody wants to eat the same thing every day for 2 years. And so it's actually difficult to do dietary studies because they're not like a medicine. And so this is part of the problem with the studies that have been done looking at diet and PKD. So for example, here's 2 of the well-known ones. There's the keto AD PKD study, and it's only been conducted with 66 people. So that's a fair bit for some of, an interventional diet study. But when you look at it, it was actually 3 different groups. And so there's around 20 people in each group. And that's not enough statistically to see an effect usually, even if there is one. And the other major study that has been done in recent years was about time-restricted or intermittent fasting. And they only studied 29 people. And there are some magic numbers you need to have in intervention studies. And it's generally around 30 per group. So we're not even getting up to the right number of people recruited to studies to see an effect. And what that did was tested whether you restricted your eating to an 8-hour window, what was the difference compared to if you just followed healthy eating advice. And they followed these people for 12 months. But there's lots of problems with these studies. Even as a dietitian, when I read through them, and I don't expect you to understand this notation on the screen here at all, but when I look at them, I actually find it really difficult to even figure out what they've fed participants in these intervention studies. I can tell you what those numbers translate into practice, but I would find it very difficult to do. I think mostly these people were following high-fat diets with lots of salad, and we know that that just doesn't make people feel satisfied. So I'm not surprised that there was low adherence to the diets. And what they did when they found out that the adherence was quite low was they readjusted their success bar, and unfortunately they still didn't see a great result when they adjusted it. So the end result of these two studies, it's good starting point for us. What we found was that both of those studies resulted in people losing weight. I suspect that's partly because people just didn't get enough to eat. And so they lost around 2 to 3% of their body weight. But what we can actually say with certainty from another recent trial was it actually really doesn't matter how you lose the weight. What we want you to do is, if you are overweight, to lose that weight, because weight loss and fat loss is more important in terms of driving kidney cyst growth than the actual timing of the eating. So what those intermittent fasting trials are really showing you is if you reduce the number of hours in a day that you have access to food, you lose weight. Not surprising. So what I'm going to do is kind of cut to the chase and tell you what we know the science is actually certain about. And that is what is the right diet for someone with PKD. So I'm going to show it to you in a diagram format. And here's what it looks like. And the reason I really like this diagram is because in literally the last 12 months or so, there's been a lot of talk about understanding what the pillars of treating kidney disease are, but nobody's ever constructed one about the pillars of treating PKD from a lifestyle perspective are, and there is a role for lifestyle. So this is what it is. If you want to maximize, do the best that you can from a lifestyle perspective, first of all, avoid becoming overweight and make sure that you're as physically active as you possibly can be. And the 5 pillars are making sure that you have a healthy diet, and I'll explain what that actually is in a second. Making sure that you follow a diet that has less salt. Now, I just want to spend 1 second explaining the nuance here. We don't want people to follow salt-free diets. There's no need for that. It makes life really boring. We don't even need, technically, people to follow a low-salt diet. And in dietitian terms, there is a certain level. And we know that that's extremely hard to stick to. What we want people to follow is a reduced salt diet. And I'll show you some examples of how we do that a little bit later. So reducing the salt in your diet as many ways as you can is great, but you don't need to be really strict and Spartan and follow, a terribly boring, bland diet. You don't need to cut out whole food groups. You can still make food enjoyable. And if you have a splurge occasionally of something salty, don't feel guilty. It's okay. It's about that consistent day in, day out intake that's more of a problem. The third pillar is making sure that you drink lots and lots of water, but I just want to put a little asterisk around that recommendation. So if you are at a stage of your kidney disease where you have been talking about dialysis approaching, then you may be at a stage where we need to restrict the total amount that you drink. So it's really important for you to check with your nephrologist, how much should I actually drink? Water is still recommended as the main fluid that you drink. But if you've got, say, stage 4 kidney disease, you don't want to be drinking 3 litres a day because your body can't get rid of it. So you're going to be making the problem worse. So that's something for everybody to check with their doctor. Making sure you watch caffeine. You do not need to follow a caffeine-free diet for PKD. It's not necessary. There's no evidence that it makes any difference. But we do know that in general terms, we want people to have a certain amount of caffeine, which I'll go through shortly. And then also making sure you watch alcohol for the same reason. Alcohol contributes extra calories. Alcohol can also contribute to dehydration. So we're not saying don't have it. We're just saying be sensible about it and follow the sensible guidelines for alcohol intake. So here's the nuts and bolts of what is a healthy diet at this stage. And I'm going to explain each of the stages. So in case you weren't already aware, there's 5 stages of kidney disease. Stage 1 to 3 are the earlier stages, and stage 4 and 5 is where you've got what we call kidney failure. So everybody, regardless of your stage, should be following a healthy dietary pattern. And what that means is making sure that you get a wide variety of foods. And when I say that, there is actually a benchmark, and it's about 30 different plant foods a week. That's actually been shown scientifically to result in a better gut microbiota profile and have better health outcomes. We also want people to have as minimal amounts of processed foods as possible because they contain lots of salt and other additives that are a problem. But if you have occasional foods, don't feel guilty. That's life. You've got to live, and sometimes you just can't avoid it. Make sure that water is your first choice because it's got low amounts of electrolytes, which are going to be positive in terms of cyst growth. When it comes to fruit intake, we want everybody to have 2 serves of fruit every day. And here's an example on the screen here of what a serve of fruit is. A serve is generally what you can fit in the palm of your hand, about the size of a half a cup or maybe just thinking maybe a tennis ball size piece. So everyone should be eating that regardless of your stage, even if you are on dialysis. What we might need to do in the later stages, though, is perhaps tailor our advice to avoid certain types of fruit. Perhaps. Now, that advice is actually fairly new. In the past, we would have said avoid certain types of fruits if you had high potassium, but even that advice is changing based on new evidence. So just don't think you need to avoid certain types of fruit. Everybody should be having 2 serves every single day, regardless of your stage. Same with veggies. Same serving size rule applies. 5 serves every day if you can get them. A serve is what you can fit in the palm of your hand or half a cup. Again, you might need to tailor the types of vegetables in the later stages, but that's also something that can be personalized and individualized, and not everybody will need to cut out different vegetables. We want people to, this is new information, okay, so you may have been told something differently, but trust me, this is appropriate and important for you to be doing. So make sure that your first choice of breads and cereals is actually wholemeal or whole grain choices. And that's because we know that that extra fiber is really important, and the potassium that is in those foods is not that bioavailable. So it's not going to put potassium levels up if you're in the later stages of kidney disease. And for most Australians, 4 to 6 serves of breads and cereals a day is what's appropriate. So that might be 2 serves of bread at lunchtime, maybe a cup of rice somewhere if you're having some dinner, and maybe a couple of Ryvitas or Vita-Weats. That's easy to get your 4 to 6 serves every day. When it comes to dairy, this is where there is a distinction, and it's really important to understand that in the early stages of kidney disease, we want you to have the right amount of dairy. Milk, yogurt, cheese, custard, they're really good and they're healthy for you. But as your kidney function declines, some people can't process the phosphorus that's in those products. And so we may ask you to restrict them to 1 to 2 serves a day. So that advice is based on your blood tests. It's also based on your advice from your nephrologist or your dietitian. So there is a distinction for dairy. We don't want people in the later stages of kidney disease to be drinking large volumes of milk or whatever, because that will make the problem worse. Okay, when it comes to protein or protein-rich foods, more specifically, you can eat meat, chicken, fish. You can eat eggs. You can be vegetarian. What's important is firstly, making sure you don't have excessive amounts of protein. The main reason why that's a problem is because when you break protein down in your body, the byproducts of that have to be filtered by the kidney. It increases the workload, first of all. And if your kidney's already struggling to work, you don't want to do that. The second reason why we want to keep to an appropriate portion size is because the byproducts of eating protein also cause a change in the concentration of your urine, and that can also end up triggering cyst growth. So we know that there is some beautiful evidence showing that plant-based proteins are actually better, but you don't need to be vegetarian. My advice would be have a couple of vegetarian meals a week. If you can, include some plant-based proteins, but it's not a hard and fast rule, but we do know that they have a more positive effect on the kidneys. Now, when it comes to an appropriate portion size, I'll show you what that is in a second, but generally it's about the size of your palm, not including your fingertips, and about as thick. Unless you're a 6'5" giant and have massive hands and very thick palms, most people should get away with roughly something around the deck of cards size, maybe a little bit bigger, and about that thick too. If you're wanting to weigh it, it's about 125 to 150 grams of meat if you are serving it up for dinner. Fish, we still want you to have at least once a week, have some nice oily fish, salmon, mackerel, tuna, beautiful, but all fish is good for you. When it comes to salt, I think this is perhaps one of the most unhelpful pieces of advice that we give. Make sure you aim for less than 5 grams a day. Who knows how much they eat normally in terms of grams of salt? It's very hard to measure, really, really hard to measure in practice. But what I can give you are some tips about how to achieve around that mark without needing to be really pedantic and recording your food intake every day. For people, sometimes that's actually useful to get a ballpark about where you're sitting, but it's not necessarily to do long term. And when it comes to caffeine, there is that ballpark mark that I was talking about, and that's about 200 milligrams a day or less for people with kidney disease. That's something that I can translate into real food terms in a second, but a general rule would be, where possible, avoid cola drinks, and that's because cola drinks have phosphoric acid, and that's not good if you've got kidney failure. Your body can't get rid of that. It will cause problems with your blood tests. So that's the science in a nutshell about what you need to eat. If you have other conditions like diabetes, for example, there might be some tweaking required, but as a general rule, that's essentially the plan you need to follow. So, is there anything I need to avoid? This is the problem. This group of foods here. On a regular basis, yes, you need to avoid them. As a treat, enjoy it, love it. That's it. That's all I'm going to say about it. Anything that's ultra processed like this provides you with far more salt and food additives like phosphorus that you don't need, and they're not as satisfying. So ideally, that's all I'm going to say about foods you need to avoid. Please feel free to ask questions later if you do need to know that. What else do I need to limit? Notice how I've crossed out avoid. You don't need to follow a caffeine-free diet. So if I told you that the benchmark was around 200 milligrams of caffeine per day or less, a typical coffee has about 150. So that means you could have a coffee each day or have a decaf, which has got much less caffeine. If it's a cup of tea, usually a black tea is around 30 to 50 milligrams. So you can drink lots and lots of tea. It's not going to be a major problem. And you can see the soft drinks there contain a fair amount of caffeine in them as well. So if caffeine is your beverage of choice, don't feel guilty about it. It's still under that 200 milligrams a day if you're having 1 or 2 of them. Don't panic. Here's some other things that you just need to limit. So as a general rule, most Australians should be having no more than 2 standard drinks a day with a couple of days in the week where you're not drinking anything at all. And what's important to understand is what's a standard drink. And, you know, a general rule would be 100 mils of wine. That's very easy. That's less than half a cup. So it's very easy to go over, especially if you find a good wine. So enjoy it, but don't panic if you have a couple of, you know, beverages for an occasion. It's not going to do you harm immediately. It's not going to be like potassium where it causes immediate harm, but it's the long-term intake that's the problem. So what I thought I would do now is start going through some of the misconceptions or perhaps the fact from fiction. And here's the first one. There's a picture here of a glass of water or a bottle of water, and people have a perception that water should be the only drink that you can have. Now, it is ideal, but these are the sorts of things that would also count. Tea, herbal tea. It could be water with some, you know, fruit added to it like lime or lime juice or lemon juice. Even diet soft drinks I would not have a problem with if you're the sort of person that wants to drink those and you just want to have a bit of variety in the diet. what's important when it comes to fluid is actually the electrolytes that are in those drinks, because they're the things that contribute to the concentration of what's going through your kidneys. And we know that that's what kind of influences the growth of the cysts. So water's great, but if you get really bored of it, don't feel guilty. Maybe add some diet cordial, maybe add some lemon juice, maybe have a cup of tea, maybe have some herbal tea, whatever. It's okay. The next thing is I'm just going to touch a little bit more detail now about salt. So I often get told I need a meal plan because I need to follow a salt-free diet. It's virtually impossible. It is impossible to follow a salt-free diet. So don't think that you're doing wrong by saying this is really hard. It is hard to do. But what I can give you some advice about is where you can start. So if you want to start reducing the amount of salt in your diet, start with these food groups because they are known to be the highest contributors to salt in the Australian diet. They also don't contribute much generally from a nutrition perspective. But let me just point out two important things here. So number 2, bread. Yes, in Australia, bread contains salt, but it's also a staple food. It's a core food. I don't want you to cut out bread. It's important for people to keep breads and cereals in the diet. What I want you to do is to have a look around and maybe make some choices to find breads that are a bit lower in salt. You don't have to have low salt bread. If you want to make it yourself, great. But there are easy ways you can cut out salt by making different choices. And the other thing that I just wanted to point out was those milk products. Milk products are still nutritious. So milk, yogurt, custard, fine. What is important is we think about the stage of kidney disease you're at and the types of milk products that you're choosing. So for example, cheese is a milk product that's a problem, and we can make some better choices there. So as you can see, there's some great kind of starting points for you. But in order to make the right swaps, you must understand how to read a food label, and not everybody understands what you're looking for. So I'm just going to go through it quickly. So first of all, there's 2 columns in Australia on every food package. The first one is per 100 grams and the other one is per serve. The serving size can be made as small or as large as the food company wants. So if you're trying to compare between products, always choose the per 100 grams column. And what you're looking for there is sodium. So in this case, the benchmark is a low salt product in Australia is generally something that has less than 120 milligrams per 100 grams. And breads generally sit around the 400 milligrams per 100 grams. So that means if you're having, say, I don't know, 3 slices of bread, you're generally getting around 1 gram of salt. Let me just show you, though, some examples of how you can make some better bread choices, for example. So here's some example. I just chose these 3 just to illustrate the purpose. I'm not saying everybody needs to have these instead of bread, but here's the principle. If you know how to look at the food label now, here's how you could easily save extra salt and get rid of it from your diet. And as a general rule, we just want to aim for cutting out 1 or 2 grams of salt from your diet, from where your starting point is. So here's an example. The middle one, which is the wholemeal one, which you would traditionally think is a great choice, actually has quite a lot of sodium. But if you look around in the same aisle, this low carb one has less sodium for some reason. Oops. So that's actually a better choice, and you've saved yourself nearly 400 milligrams of sodium, and you've got some extra fiber. So that's a better choice for this example. What about cheese? Well, here's some examples of the difference. You can save yourself 150 milligrams if you perhaps use a bit of bocconcini. And I'll give you a classic example of how this would work in practice. So I make pasta bake a lot. I've got 2 teenagers. Yes, I put cheese in it, but what I do is I fill it up with the bocconcini first. That's what I intersperse amongst the pasta and the meat in the dish. It makes it cheesy, it makes it stretchy. And the cheese that I put on the top is the tasty cheese, but I use less of it. I haven't needed to add heaps and heaps of cheese to the dish because I've used an alternative cheese that's lower first. Here's an example of just choosing a different brand of tomato sauce. There's quite a wide variation in salt content between some of your condiments. So do spend some time in the supermarket just having a look around. Remember, you're trying to cut out around 1,000 milligrams or 1 gram of salt or of sodium from the diet, and that's going to make a really important impact on your health. So in just those 3 swaps alone, we've saved ourselves around 600 milligrams of that target of around 1,000 milligrams. If you can keep cutting out a little bit more, great, but you don't have to be super Spartan about it. What you want to do is start making those swaps out of your diet. And just as a reminder, these are all salt. It doesn't matter whether it's labeled pink salt, black salt, Himalayan salt, it's all salt. It all has the same effect. Don't be tricked by the good marketing. And I would also like to point out a really important point here. So if you have stage 3, stage 4, or stage 5 kidney disease, please don't use any of these salts on the screen here because they contain potassium chloride, which you will have trouble getting rid of, and it can cause a high blood potassium level. It's a problem because it's increasingly being added to foods, because when you add potassium chloride to food, it takes out some of the sodium chloride. So therefore manufacturers can say, my food is lower in sodium. That's true. But for people with kidney disease, it also means it's higher in potassium. And when you have kidney disease at those end stages, you can't process that potassium in the same way. So it's quite dangerous. One of the things that I recommend is using spice mixes that you either make yourself or you can buy. And there's a great place in Sydney called Herbie's, which is has an online shop, and you can buy this thing called Zolt. And it's a salt substitute that has no potassium in it, but it tastes sensational. I use it a lot. I add it as a spice mix onto, say, chicken or to beef, and you just pan fry it. It tastes beautiful, gives great flavor. So experimenting with some of these things is actually really good, and it adds flavor to your food, but without sodium. The other thing I just wanted to mention is if you are into technology, there's a range of different apps on the market now, but this is the only one I recommend. And that's why I've been involved in the development of this. Now, why do I recommend this app over others? 2 reasons. The first one is it uses an Australian food composition database. All the ones on the market don't use Australian food composition databases. And there are major differences in the composition of packaged foods between America and the UK and Australia. So you actually could be getting misleading information. And the second reason is it's actually constantly being updated with Australian foods that are on the shelves right now. So it's got a kind of a lead time of about 2 or 3 days. As soon as a new version of something is released on the shelf in Australia, it doesn't take them long to add it to this. So what you can do is you can record a food diary. So that means you could just literally put in everything you eat for a day or a couple of days. And if you tick this thing called Enable Renal Options, it will tell you the sodium, the potassium, the phosphorus, the protein. And if you know what your benchmarks are, you can actually see how well you're doing or not. And you can also identify which foods are contributing the most salt, for example, to your diet, or have a look at the protein intake from a large serve of whatever you normally have. So it really increases your awareness of the sorts of foods you're eating. The other advantage is you can email, just click email, and you can send the diary through to a dietitian who works in Australia, and we can open it with the software to send you the printout of the analysis. Just going back to that portion size, as I said before, I'd show you what an appropriate portion size is. It's roughly palm size, not including your fingertips, and about as thick. Or, you know, compared to an old phone, it's about a little bit bigger. So it's probably that one in the middle. That's probably the best choice, the 4-ounce one, which is about 120 grams. Okay, I'm just going to change a bit of tack here. Constant question that I get as a dietitian is, should I take Keto Citra? For those of you that don't know what this is, it's a supplement that was developed alongside one of the trials in America looking at keto diets. And what they found as an incidental finding was that there's a chemical substance that gets produced when you follow a keto diet called beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. And Keto Citra is a supplement of this. Now, you generally need around 1 scoop a day according to their trial. However, it's really expensive. It's about $5 a scoop, and you don't need to take it. Okay, it's not necessary. And there's a lot of hype around this supplement. And for most Australians, you don't need to follow it at all. So unless you're following a specific diet that's very low in carbohydrate and you're following a keto diet strictly, it's just wasted money. So don't spend the money to buy it. Okay, what's new? Let me just briefly introduce 2 studies for you. So I have an interest in understanding what people with PKD actually eat. And so here's the study that I've been doing for the last little while. What we're doing is what's called an observational study. So it's not an intervention. I'm not asking you to change your diet in any way. I just want to know what regular people with PKD eat. Because once we know that, we can then design interventions to help people. But we can't do it unless we know what people's baseline eating habits are like. And just based on some preliminary analysis that we've already done, so we've recruited 82 people and we got 59 people to send through their record of what they eat. It generally falls into 3 categories. There's the group of people with PKD who eat really healthy, and they're the shining examples. But then there's 2 groups of people with PKD who are eating far too much junk food, and some of them are sweet pastry kind of ultra processed food people, and some of them are more the savory type people. But in either case, to me as a dietitian, that tells me we need to cut down on the number of ultra processed foods that we're eating across the board when we have PKD. So this is why an observational study is really important. We do need more men in the study. So it seems like women were mostly interested. And what we found was, when we break it down to the tin tacks, people were eating excessive amounts of protein, unfortunately. So we know that that drives cyst growth as a general rule. They were eating far too much saturated fat, which is bad for heart health. They did pretty good on the fiber and salt, so that message is coming through nice. But overall, the diet quality was not great. And only 1 in 3 people in the study actually had what we would consider excellent diet quality. So to me, this already helps me understand what kind of messaging and diet sheets and information should dietitians be giving to people with PKD. Where should we start? We're still recruiting, so if you are interested in being part of the study, please just use this QR code to sign up. It's observational. You literally don't need to do anything except fill in a few questionnaires now and in 12 months' time. And there are a number of people who, if you would like to contribute a urine sample as well, we would love to have it. And all we need is a copy of your results. So you could send us one of your recent urine test results if you've got it. So the more information we have about the population of PKD who are in Australia and what they eat, the better it will be in terms of designing interventions. The second study that was funded by PKD Australia is about, it's called the ANIMATE study. And let me just tell you a little bit about this. So one of the problems with dietary interventions is it's actually challenging to find out if people are making the changes that they say they are. And so what we're doing is we're actually trying to figure out if this device, which is called a veggie meter, can actually help us determine the quality of a person's diet. So what we do is we basically stick our finger in this little device and it squashes it. And what it does is it squashes the fat pad on your finger. And underneath that fat pad is a light that's being shined up into your fat pad. And what it's measuring are the red and yellow and greenish kind of pigments that come from fruits and vegetables, which are a really good proxy marker of diet quality. And what that's being able to tell us is, are people following a good quality diet, and does that get better as a result of an intervention? So that knowledge is really important, because we need to know, does this intervention improve diet quality, and therefore is it making a difference in terms of the health of people? Because we know that having adequate skin carotenoids, which is what we're measuring, actually is protective for a person's health. So we will be recruiting for this study, and all you'd need to do is literally come and put your finger in, come and have a blood test and fill in a questionnaire for me, and we're done. And it's also great. It's really fun to figure out for example, as a dietitian, I thought, oh, great, I'm going to do a great job. Let me put my finger in there. But even me, I've had areas where I've just gone, oh dear, I'll have to improve my intake of orange and yellow and red foods because mine wasn't ideal either. So it's a great tool. So in terms of some closing words for you, because I do want to spend some time on questions, what we need to do is make sure we're still eating that age-old, sage-old advice about making sure we get the 5 different food groups. You don't need to cut food groups out to help manage your PKD. And we want people to eat better, not less. So where do you start? Start with some smart substitutions to help reduce salt. Definitely increase the amount of fruits and veggies that you eat. If you're not eating the 2 serves of fruit and the 5 serves of vegetable, that would be the most bang for your buck to improve the quality of your diet. And maybe don't think about changing all your diet at once. Maybe just start with breakfast. And then when you've, made some changes that you've got into a habit that you do regularly, start with other meals or snacks. Because it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? You can't change everything overnight. For those of you that don't know, this is the cookbook that myself and some students put together. It's available free to download from the PKD website. So you just need to look at that link there. And here are some new things which you may or may not be aware of. This is a fabulous website from the UK, and there's a huge number of recipes that you should just have a look at for inspiration. They're all suitable for people with kidney disease, and they taste fabulous. I've tested quite a few of them. And here's another website that's devoted specifically to recipes for people with kidney disease. They're safe for everybody, whatever your stage of PKD. So if you want to have a look at some recipes from Guatemala or wherever, here's your home to have a look at. So please feel free to email me if you have any questions or you're confused or whatever it might be after the fact, and I'll hopefully answer them for you. So how about we answer some questions? All righty.
Thanks, Kelly.
No problems.
Do you want any particular questions that have already been sent through to you?
No, but I might just have, yes, that would be good. I don't have them in front of me though, so maybe I'll start with these ones. Would I have some general guidelines on eating out at cafes and restaurants? I think the general rule would be go and enjoy it. Go and enjoy the food, the social experience, having fun with people, and don't feel guilty. The problem is when you do that regularly and you choose terrible choices every single time. But as a general rule, always make sure if you're looking down at your plate or at the dish that you're going to be ordering, does roughly half the main meal contain vegetables or salad? If not, order those as a side dish. You just need to try and find as many ways as possible to get extra vegetables and fruit into your diet. Make sure that when you look at the protein portion of the meal, is it roughly the palm of your hand? And most of the time, it's generally far larger than that. Now, it's up to you whether you choose to leave some of it, or just remember that, you don't need to order a huge steak. It's just excessive and unnecessary most of the time. Hopefully that answers your question. I kind of want to remove the guilt from eating out. Please feel free to do those things because that's what makes life interesting and enjoyable, right? As well. Thoughts on coconut water and the electrolytes? Unnecessary, basically. It's expensive and you don't need to do it. So if you like it, great, but it's not something that you need to do per se. Somebody's commented that it's helpful to know that Woolworths and Coles sells Bill's bread, which is low in salt. Great. So if it's nice, feel free to use it. Otherwise, make your salt reductions elsewhere. Just remember it's a staple food. Okay. Does PKD Australia have any resources on their website that give a visual overview of those guidelines? No, I don't think we do.
Yet.
Maybe we could.
I think we definitely could. Also just to your kidney recipe book, I've also just put that in the chat as a direct link. I know it's on the slides as well.
Yep.
But that is something we can definitely add.
Yeah, if that's what people find helpful, great. Next question. What is the effect of keto on kidney function in people with PKD? Well, of the 2 human studies they've done so far, made no difference. Didn't slow the decline in kidney function, made no difference. So again, it's another reason not to be kind of caught on this bandwagon and hype, because it made no difference at all. Any pointers for a transplant recipient and about diet? Okay, if you have had a transplant and you have not seen a dietitian after your transplant, please do, because the diet after transplant actually changes over time. And it's generally divided into two phases. The first phase is kind of the acute phase, and that's where your kidney's still getting used to being in your body and things go skew-if. And the advice is quite different for long term. So that's where we need to think more in the long term about preventing the development of diabetes, preventing weight gain, making sure that your cholesterol stays under control, your triglycerides stay under control. So it's more about living a healthy lifestyle after about 6 to 8 months after a transplant. So it goes back to that kind of pillars that I was talking about before. You can't go wrong if you're following those pillars of a healthy diet, 2 fruit, 5 vegetables, making sure after transplant you drink lots of fluid. Okay, is creatine a good product for folks with PKD? Creatine's an unnecessary product for people with PKD. Let me just give a little explanation. So creatine is a byproduct of protein. And in the athlete population, there's lots of studies demonstrating it helps with alertness and helps with muscle strength and so on. The problem is it also has to be filtered by the kidney. So it actually increases the workload. So I would be staying away from it. One, because it's unnecessary. You get creatine naturally from any time you eat a protein-rich food. But secondly, you just don't want to have a supplement that's increasing the workload of your kidney. It's unnecessary. Hopefully that answers your question. Any different advice for kids with PKD? Yeah, please come and see a dietitian if you haven't already when you've got a child with PKD, mainly because we're balancing two things there. We want your child to grow beautifully, normally, but we're balancing the complications that can occur with PKD. But we are also wanting children to establish really good, healthy eating habits so that, you know, if they do have a transplant later on, they know what it's like to live a healthy life and they don't get bogged down in unnecessary restrictions too early. So if your kids are eating a lot of fruit, great. I'm happy with that. Even if they don't eat many veggies, as long as they're getting that combined 2 serves plus 5 a day, so maybe 7 serves a day, please don't feel guilty about it. That's fine. Any problem drinking plain soda water or carbonated water? Carbonated water is fine. Soda water is a bit of a problem because of the sodium. So I'd probably just stick with carbonated water if you like it, just for a break. Yep. Creatine and whey protein powder for an active individual in the early stages of kidney disease. Unnecessary, really. Again, why are we taking those things? It's to boost people's protein intake. But generally, people don't have a problem with getting enough protein in their diets. In Australia, we live in a society where protein excess is the norm, not the exception. So I think probably for the most part, it's either being used as a source of energy or it's not being used at all. And then you're getting extra calories that you don't need. When I go on hikes, I lose a lot of electrolytes. Is taking replacement electrolytes okay? Yeah, look, this is an interesting general question. Unless your hike is like 10 Ks, you generally just can have water as your replacement. If you're doing long hikes or intense exercise, which lasts a couple of hours and you sweat a lot and you clearly are losing a lot of body weight from fluid, then yes, a drink with electrolytes would be fine as a replacement. But there's actually been a lot of studies done in the sports space now to say that you could just have regular drinks like milk and have the same thing. What I would suggest is if you are doing intense exercise and you want to use an electrolyte containing drink, please make sure that the one that you're choosing, either Gatorade or Powerade or whatever, has glucose. Otherwise, you won't absorb those electrolytes. They actually act as a partner, a magnet. You can't absorb those electrolytes unless there's glucose there, and then they both get taken up and help rehydrate you. So you can actually get glucose-free versions, and that's a waste of time and money. You have to have the glucose if you're using it for electrolyte replacement. Okay. Any other questions?
I did see one question about getting a copy of the slides, and yes, I will be sending around the slides, and also this is recorded and it will be up on our YouTube channel next week. So, so you know, there's one more that has just come through about taking daily vitamin supplements. Is that harmful for PKD?
Again, it depends on the stage of your kidney disease. So let me just divide the answer into parts. So a general multivitamin is fine. You can take them every now and then. It's fine. It's kind of good insurance. You don't need to take it every day. And if you were, I'd be a little bit worried that you don't have a good quality diet. So it's something that you can have just as an insurance, take it occasionally. However, if you have kidney disease that's at 50% function or less, so an eGFR of around 50 or less, you just can't choose a multivitamin off the shelf. Excuse me. And that's because your ability to excrete some vitamins actually changes over time as your kidney function changes. And so what you're going to get is an accumulation of some of those vitamins, which can be a problem. So always speak to, say, your doctor or a renal dietitian about what would be the most specific vitamin supplement for your stage of kidney disease, because there are a number of vitamins we want you to have more of. For example, if you're on dialysis, there are a number of vitamins that we want you to have a lot of, but you might already be on an individual supplement for that your doctor's prescribing. But there are a number of vitamins that we don't want you to take in excessive amounts. But again, it depends on your blood tests and your state of your kidney disease. So that's kind of where caution is required. Hopefully that answers that question.
Sounds good. A couple more questions from what was sent through that perhaps you could answer.
Yep.
Relating to any effects on the liver, and
Oh, yeah.
whether the diet that, you know, for the kidney is also affecting the liver.
I'm not quite sure if I get the gist of the question, but if the question is, should this kind of dietary pattern be followed if you have complications with the liver, the answer is absolutely yes. It works. It kills two birds with one stone. It actually helps with your liver and it helps with your kidneys. So the 2 fruit, the 5 veg, the reduced sodium, the fluid, all of that's important. The one thing that might be specific is, depending on how much of a problem you're having with your liver, there might be some specific advice that you need to follow about having a snack at supper. But again, that depends on the stage and the amount of problems that you're having with your liver. So again, having some individualized advice might be useful there as well.
Well, then that leads nicely into the next question, which is, I guess, more about the practicalities of seeing a dietitian. Does it cost money to see a dietitian, or can we get referred to one? And do you know if it's covered by Medicare?
Yes. So there's 2 ways you can see a dietitian in Australia. Any public hospital with a renal unit will have a renal dietitian attached to it. And I would, if you have a nephrologist, get them to refer you to the public dietitian, then it's free. The other way is via Medicare. So you can get a referral, you can get an enhanced primary care plan to see a dietitian. The problem is you only get 5 visits for allied health in total, and you might have already used 2 for podiatry and 1 for a physio, and then you've only got 2 visits left for a dietitian. But it is covered, and I think it's around $60 is covered now. Most dietitians, though, will have an excess on top of that, and it won't cover all of the visits that you probably want to have if you've got kidney disease, but it does get renewed every year. So that's why I'm saying go to a public hospital dietitian, renal dietitian first, where possible, because you can get more visits. It doesn't cost you anything. And the other advantage is, for the most part, they have access to all of your pathology and they have a closer interaction with the treating team generally. So it's far easier for action to happen and for them to get access to information quickly if they need it. It is a challenge though. Like I know there are some renal dietitians around who see people, but they don't always see them via telehealth, or, you know, that's a bit of a problem. And I do have the names of a few people around the place who will see people via telehealth if that's a problem and you can't find someone locally. So I can always pass those on to you, Jess. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about that. It is important because there is specialized expertise with kidney disease that you need. But as long as you're providing your dietitian with access to all the biochemistry and the medical history about yourself, almost every dietitian should be able to put a picture together, a plan together. It's just sometimes people's confidence in doing that might be a little bit less if they work not in that renal specific space all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think that is the majority of questions that we had come through. I mean, we're in the 11th hour, but I did want to ask how you actually started with getting involved in PKD research, because I think that's also a wonderful thing to know about our researchers. How did you end up doing that? And
Yeah. You know what? I actually didn't have that many. So I worked as a renal dietitian for a long time. I didn't have that many encounters with people with PKD. They tended to be fairly self-sufficient until quite late in the piece, I had an invitation from PKD Australia to help host an event in Wollongong. And we had a beautiful number of locals in the community who were really passionate, and I got connected with them and I really loved their passion. And I realised then that dietitians really needed much more education about how to manage people with PKD and to do research in that space. And even though I don't have any people I know in my family with PKD, I still think it's a really important area of kidney disease that we need to do a lot more research in. So it was through kind of the local PKD Australia volunteer community that I got connected, and yeah, it was great. And hello if they're watching, you know who
yeah,
you are.
that's
Yeah,
awesome. It is, and we're so thrilled to have also given you a grant this year for such
thank you.
essential research. And yeah, clearly there's many people very interested in this because we all eat every day.
That's right. Yes.
And I think the tools that you have given us tonight are extremely helpful, extremely practical.
Thank you.
I'm excited to go and make dinner now. So
Yeah.
on behalf of the board and everybody at PKD Australia and everybody watching, thank you so much for sharing
My
with
pleasure.
me. And for also, like, this isn't the first time, as you said, you've shared with us. There's been a few updates over the years. So we're really grateful that you come back and give us
Thank you.
information. So, and just as a fun aside, for PKD Australia, right now we're actually running a fundraising campaign called Kick PKD, and one of our board members is cooking kidney-friendly recipes that Kelly has had input on, I have heard. And so if you wanted to follow along on his challenge, Dan, if I don't know if you're here tonight, but Dan's doing a kidney-friendly recipe each week in the lead up to PKD Awareness Day. So that might be something that you'd like to follow along with and support. And as I said, the link to Kelly's recipe book is in the chat, but this webinar will be up on YouTube. Hello to those watching after the fact. And we also have those links on our website. And if in doubt, just email me or please email Kelly, and we'd be very happy to chat with you further. So thank you,
Thank you.
and I wish you all a really good night.
Thanks, everyone.